gatherings where we read and discuss our writings on topics of interest. I am Catherine Thorne. It is our distinct pleasure to share with you excerpts of the work we've been doing over the years. We are united in our belief that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior. That premise undergirds our writing, which we trust will stimulate and entertain. Let me welcome you to our reading and thank the writers for sharing some of their published and unpublished works and writings in progress. Our chat room is open and we invite your feedback there. We begin this evening's reading with Kalina Constantinescu, who from a young age has had a wide range of interests and a fertile imagination. She has recently found an outlet for this creativity in writing children's adventure stories. She hopes that her children's books will teach, inspire, and entertain readers of all ages. This evening, Kalina will read the first chapter of an unpublished novel titled The March of the Ants. Yes, A-N-T-S, ants. It's about two young ants who set out to hike the Jesus Trail in Israel. Along the way, the two friends discover a taste for adventure as they learn about the life and ministry of Jesus. Kalina?
Thank you, Catherine. The March of the Ants, Chapter 1, Final Preparations. Viewed from above, the ant colony appeared as a small, concentrically arranged pile of dirt, 3 centimeters across, with a pinprick-sized hole at its center. However, this unremarkable mound camouflaged an entire complex of tunnels. The nest, a maze of passages and chambers, was 2 meters deep and 2 meters wide. It housed the nurseries and living quarters. More superficially, another series of tunnels used for foraging emerged. These ran parallel to the surface for several kilometers and zigzagged the colony's entire territory. With so many entranceways, it was never easy to keep out invaders. Security was always a problem. There was another drawback too. Every spring, the nest flooded and the ants were forced to relocate to higher ground. Starting at the end of December, flash floods transformed the colony's desert surroundings into a soggy, waterlogged mess. 5 years back, the rains had arrived early and the anthill had flooded overnight. The ants had been washed out of their tunnels and carried downstream for kilometers. Many of them had never returned. Except for those disadvantages, the colony was a wonderful place to live. However, now after months of preparations, the ants were leaving their cherished home. That morning, everyone had awoken at dawn. After a quick breakfast, the adults had reported for filling in duty. It turned out to be a hot and humid day, but the work advanced quickly. In one of the western tunnels, Jack and his friend Bill held on to each other to avoid being drawn into the throng of workers that filed past them. Bill and Jack had both been hatched just 8 months ago. Neither of them could remember a time, though, when the colony had talked about anything else but the great march of the ants. Jack's face got pressed into the earth of the tunnel wall. He tried to ignore the dust as he sneezed twice. After what seemed like an eternity, the boys were alone in the tunnel again. They returned to their conversation. "We must be the luckiest larva that ever hatched," said Jack. "Since the sea died, thousands of generations of our ancestors have lived in the desert. And now, in our time, the colony is moving to greener pastures." He did not add that leaving had not been a unanimous decision. Not everyone was as excited about the move as the two friends were. "The nursery was relocated during the scorpion invasion, so it's not our first move." Okay, said Bill, hoping he didn't sound as impatient as he felt. "But I mean a real move. My father says that we're going and where it rains all year." "I don't know if I believe that." Bill and Jack loved to debate everything. But the one thing they usually agreed on was mealtime. Jack began to notice he was feeling hungry. Both boys promised to meet back in an hour. Then each headed home. Jack took the south tunnel while his friend headed in the opposite direction. Back in his own quarters, Jack sat with his parents and younger brother at a table laden with sandwiches. Jack daydreamed about hiking through the desert and tried to recall what his father had said about their upcoming trip. They would travel through the territory of the divine beings. They would start at the famous village and they would travel north. Then they would follow the trail of the divine beings, which led to the great waters. Like all schoolboys, he had learned the names that the divine beings had given to the ground above. He strained to remember the places his teacher had recited: Nazareth, Cana, Capernaum. Grabbing another sandwich, Jack wished he had listened better during his geography and history classes. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Kalina, for that journey into the world of the ant and for giving us an ant's perspective. I believe adults will find the march of the ants as interesting as children. A reminder that our chat room is open. We value your feedback. Our next contribution comes from Effie Dolton Cordero. Born and raised in Bombay, India, with roots in the Portuguese colony of Goa, Effie lived in the Middle East, specifically Bahrain and Abu Dhabi, for 8 years before emigrating in 1989 to Canada. Convent educated with British textbooks and reading material, Effie made up stories for her young siblings and later wrote out memories of her grandparents and great grandparents so that her Canadian born sons would know their roots. She mainly writes testimonies of God's goodness in her life and non-fiction stories that reflect the Indo-Portuguese culture of her family and neighbors. Effie shares one reflection of her family's rich heritage. Effie?
Oh, thank you, Catherine. Grandpa Dolton. Granny Effie de Cruz, my paternal grandmother, was born in April 1907 and spent her childhood in Ranoi in the village of Aldona in Goa. In 1923, at the age of 16, by an arranged marriage, Effie was married to my grandfather, Philomen Marcelino de Souza, 20 years her senior, but who at 36 was considered a catch. He was born in June 1887. His family was also Goan Catholic from Kitla Aldona. He was considered extra special because he had made good by immigrating to Bombay and landing a job in the British Railways there. They had 4 sons and 2 daughters. My father, Ferdinand, was their fourth son. A little historical background about Goa and India. The Portuguese sailor Vasco da Gama arrived in Goa in 1498 and brought traders and missionaries with him. Francis Xavier, now Saint Francis Xavier, a Jesuit priest, converted most of the local Hindus to Catholicism, and all the new converts changed their names to the names of their Portuguese sponsors. The British also arrived as traders through the East India Trading Company in 1600 and stayed to rule the entire country till 1947. Bombay, a group of islands about 1,000 kilometers away, was originally in possession of the Portuguese, but was later given over to the British as part of a marriage dowry. There were a lot of opportunities in Bombay due to British development and industry as compared to Goa under the Portuguese with their festas and sosegado relaxed attitudes. So my grandfather Philomen was brave enough to take the train to Bombay to learn English and to find his own way in that bustling city. He rose to the level of a guard on the trains of the BB&CI railway, known today as the Western Railway. In those days, the trains only traveled up and down between Bombay and Baroda. My grandfather was a self-motivated, hard-working man, but had hit the proverbial glass ceiling because of his Portuguese Indian roots. One day, someone said to him, "The bosses sit thousands of miles away in their offices in London and make decisions about promotions, not based on merit and hard work, but on the names listed. With an English name, one could go far in life." Philomen thought about this. The family joke is that he thought about it in the bathroom because he came up with Doulton from the porcelain accessories brand name Royal Doulton. That brave man took the plunge and legally changed his name from Philomen Marcelino de Souza to Fred Morris Doulton. And in what literally seemed like overnight, he was promoted from a lowly guard to the head of the BBNCI railway. They say he had a telephone in his house, unheard of in those pre-independence days, and he rode to work in a carriage. At least that's part of the family legend. He retired from that position in 1942 when ownership was taken over by the transitional Indian government. Grandpa endured the shock of my Granny Effie dying of a heart attack at age 38 in 1945, but foolishly remarried a year later and had another daughter. He was inflicted a crushing defeat by his second wife, who dumped him penniless at his eldest son's door. He died of a heart attack at age 72 in July 1959. Seems like a dead end, but he left behind a legacy of our Doulton name. He was a man of prayer and faith, and he lived Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Grandpa Doulton left us an example of courage to step out of our comfort zones, to have faith in God, and dare to walk in when He opens doors for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Effie.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, you're too kind.
Thank you for sharing this unpublished work of your family's rich history. Next, we have Eleanor Shepherd from Point Clare. Eleanor is a prolific publisher. She has more than 100 articles published in Canada, France, the USA, Belgium, Switzerland, and New Zealand. 30 years with the Salvation Army in Canada and France, including ministry in Africa, Europe, Haiti, and the Caribbean, furnished material for her award-winning book, More Questions Than Answers, Sharing Faith by Listening. Other award-winning stories appear in the books Hot Apple Cider and Christmas with Hot Apple Cider. She co-authored with her husband, Glenn, the Bible study book, Why Families. As well as writing, Eleanor conducts workshops on listening skills and prayer. Eleanor recently retired from being the pastor of an English-speaking congregation in Montreal with the Salvation Army. She is currently pursuing studies to become a prayer companion. Eleanor and her husband Glenn have two adult children. There is John, who is pursuing a PhD in rehabilitation therapy in Toronto, and Elizabeth, who is a professional musician nominated for Juno Awards for her last 5 jazz albums and regularly does tours globally. Eleanor is reading an excerpt from her book, More Questions Than Answers, Sharing Faith by Listening. This publication won an award in 2011 from the World Guild in the leadership category. Eleanor?
Thank you, Catherine. The chapter I'm looking at is the mechanics of listening, and the section is sensitivity to the person. Empathy comes from sensitivity to the person and the process of accompaniment. Authentic listening approaches others without rigidly defined expectations of the encounter. Effective listeners develop the facility to adapt to people where they are, whatever space they are in. As an accompanying listener, we place to one side our own preconceived ideas of what God is like based on our experience rather than impose them. We allow our friends to discover the reality of God at their own speed, in their own way. When we truly seek him, we find him. The scriptures assure us in Jeremiah 29 and 13. As listeners, we will always need to be ready to go back again to the beginning with our friends and allow them to start over based on whatever understanding of God they've been able to consolidate into their lives. As God is patient, so he will enable us to be. Successful listening means making the effort to look at others in a positive, constructive way. All of us have strengths and weaknesses, assets and faults. Nowhere is this more obvious than in our families. One day I was venting to my brother about the way the attitude of another member of the family was so frustrating to me. I said, I just don't know how to deal with this and not let it interfere with our relationship. He said to me, what you need to remember is that this particular attitude is not the totality of the person. This person has so many positive characteristics that you appreciate. Look at the whole person. Each of us is more than our weaknesses and our faults. We are also our assets and our strengths. We need to remember that for ourselves and for each other. Looking at the totality of a person enables us to listen without being blinded by the person's shortcomings. Genuine listening encourages responsibility. We refuse to fall into the trap of seeing those we accompany as victims, even when they are carrying baggage from a past over which they had little control. Through our accompaniment, we might create an environment where our friends will finally feel free to abandon their burdens, or at least to put them down for a while, so they can focus on the direction they want to go. Then they become free to choose the path toward the God who's waiting to welcome them with outstretched arms. When burdens have been carried too long, they become symbols of our identity. Then they are not easily discarded. Giving them up involves a dramatic change in identity. A burden takes on proportions that feel larger than reality when it's been kept inside as a tightly guarded secret. Once expressed, a burden can assume its appropriate size, and the bearer can choose to dispose of it. Some burdens cannot be discharged. Barring a miracle, my son cannot be freed from his quadriplegia, the result of a car accident. He must always bear this burden. However, as Johnny Erickson Tada has shown us by her patient endurance, such burdens can transform us. They can become the marks of our identification with Christ. They give us the right to the unique fellowship of those who share in his sufferings. Os Guinness reminds us, today's brotherhood of the victimized ones is a twisted counterfeit of the fellowship with the crucified one. All of us who are followers of Christ will flinch at times from the pain of wounds and the smart of slights. But that cost is in the contract of calling and is the way of the cross. Thank you for listening. Speaker is going to be Catherine Thorne, who is our also emceeing this evening for us. Catherine was born to Christian parents and raised in Trinidad, one of the twin islands of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the Southern Caribbean. 20 years as a television journalist and news producer speak of exposure to a wide variety of amazing encounters with people, including international personalities within the Caribbean and beyond. She's been involved in a broad spectrum of events, from activities within local communities to conferences and events involving heads of governments and movers and shakers in business, politics, academia, and entertainment. Catherine has been living in Canada on and off over the last 5 years. Canada was on her bucket list for experiencing life with 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, and winter of her childhood education, versus the Caribbean's 2 seasons, wet and dry. Catherine, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Tree climbing. I can't come down, the 5-year-old girl cried out to her brother. It seemed so easy and so much fun when the young brothers climbed into the mango tree in the backyard. She yearned to join the boys in the climb up the tree. The boys would pick ripe mangoes and eat them before scaling back down to the ground. They always said girls couldn't climb trees. She would show them. I could climb too, she said to herself. Her opportunity presented itself that fateful Sunday afternoon when everyone went out and left her home alone. I would climb the tree and get back down before anyone could come back home, she thought. Girls could do anything boys could do, she said to herself. What seemed like fun challenge soon turned into her biggest nightmare. She straddled the tree just as she had seen the boys doing and struggled painfully to make the first few paces up. It seemed like fun to climb into the tree, but she found out the hard way it was not as easy as it looked. However, she was determined. I could do this, she said to herself as she struggled up inch by inch. Finally, she reached the first branch and happily straddled it. Proudly, she looked down. Oops! The ground is so far away. Panic stepped in. Oh God, I'm scared to move. I don't want to fall. I will die if I fall. She wrapped her arms around the tree trunk and held on for dear life. She couldn't look down again. That did not feel good. It seemed like an eternity before anyone returned home. Eventually, her big brother strode into the backyard. The relieved little girl shouted, I can't come down. Her big brother looked around, searching for the voice, and saw his little sister in the tree, clutching a branch. In alarm, he said, What on earth are you doing up there? She cried out, I'm up here. Get me down. I can't come down. You crazy little girl. You are lucky I came home earlier than I had planned. Looking around, he dragged a table from nearby and placed it under the tree. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked for a chair to make some more height. He found one and placed it on the table. Don't move, he said sternly. as he climbed onto the table, then stood on the chair. He reached up into the branch, but he would need her cooperation to get her off the branch. I'm afraid I will fall, she cried. Don't be afraid, he said. I'll get you down. Swing your foot over the branch. I don't want to fall. I won't let you fall, he coaxed. She did as he asked, and he took her off the branch. Never climb a tree again, he warned sternly as he put her foot down on the table. That warning was redundant. The shaken and embarrassed little girl did not need an admonition. She had learned her lesson. Her tree climbing days had come to an abrupt end with that Sunday afternoon adventure. Thank you for allowing me to share that short memoir. Daryl Zollner is a visual artist and writer with a certificate in writing for children and teenagers from the Institute of Children's Literature, West Reading, Connecticut. She also holds a BFA with mention in art education from Concordia University in Montreal and a certificate in French language from Bethel Word of Life in Lennoxville. She works beside her husband, who is now semi-retired from 3 responsibilities in Christian ministry: as a pastor urban missionary, as a seminary professor and director of studies in Christian missions and pastoral training, and as deputy chaplain of the Canadian Armed Forces, responsible for chaplains across Canada. The Zollners left their native British Columbia to spend their ministry years in Quebec under the auspices of Mission to North America, an agency of the Presbyterian Church of America. 4 of their 6 children remain in Quebec. 3 of them are married, with a total of 10 children. Spare time for the Zollners has been spent kayaking, urban hiking, interacting with their children and 18 grandchildren, and training already disciples to make more disciples of Jesus Christ from the fellowship of their local church. Daryl has her studio study in their home in southwest Montreal and continues to work creatively in several media. Daryl is reading the preface and a portion of the introduction of the publication. Daryl?
Okay, I'll start here. Captured by Canadians is a historical novel that I wrote a few years ago. Anyway, here's the preface and part of the introduction. When the end of a story brings the characters home again, the reader has a sense of relief. Everything will be all right. I brought the reader to a different sort of conclusion in this narrative. This is a tragedy, yet the outcome takes on a sort of happy resolution. Death has been slaughtered in the forum of faith, the home for the eternal soul. Mourning is changed to dancing. This is also a romance, not between humans, but between a lost race and its creator, between a persevering light and a musty dark prison. It represents an old wind puffing out new sails rather than a new wind puffing out old sails. So much of what interests us has to do with our future. This is a story about the future of you, the reader, who lives in a world where you also sometimes feel like a hostage, or you see yourself as a first generation in a new world. Perhaps you are the first generation of your family to live where you do. Much has not changed from past generations. You hold knowledge. Today is your life, and your life is lived today. The challenge will be in the believing and the unbelieving. What will you come to believe by opening these pages? Only you, dear reader, will know. Introduction. Canada, also known to the First Nations as the Village, has lived a variety of periods of history beyond those of its First Nations ancestors. The first 155 years or so of European immigration, including Samuel de Champlain, may be called the period of New France, when the village existed, beginning in 1608. It was an extensive collection of fur trading posts and fishing colonies, later to be scattered with missions and wooden forts. Then, in 1665, it became a royal colony of France, surrounded by British territories. The second epoch began when Canada continued its organization, but as a British colony after the 1759 conquest and the Treaty of 1763. In 1867, the French and English blended government jurisdictions of Lower Canada, former areas of New France, and Upper Canada, the western settlements established by the English and American loyalists who migrated north. This created a dominion where God would reign from sea to sea, as Psalm 72, verse 8 describes. This comprised a period of about 160 years in length. Thirdly, after 1867 came the present-day Confederation of Canada, from sea to sea and then to the north. Progressively, this next 135 period and more witnessed Canada unite 10 equal provinces and 2 territories to become a nation, capable of hosting other nationalities. It was a haven for famine and war refugees, industrial experts, and agricultural communities who continue to share in its globally extended hospitality. Hospitality has become more and more efficient as these 3 periods have given rise to a present-day multinational Canada. In 1999, Nunavut, the 3rd Canadian territory, was constituted. Many disputes over treaty lands held by native bands are in the Canadian courts. Public building owners and institutions have begun to make mention of these disputed lands upon which they are built. Upper and Lower Canada are still considered by some as 2 solitudes, and Quebecers, like other Canadians, are now a mix of many nationalities who have immigrated since the Second World War. But this story goes back to that period in time when Canada, the village, referred to Amerindians, French citizens, and migrants living in New France, all subjects of the French King Louis XIV. The rest of the introduction is a bit long to read, so I will leave you with this extract, and thank you for any interest you might have in my work. You'll see an email in some of these chats, I think, to be able to connect with each one of the writers.
Thank you, Daryl. Our next contributor is Willie Cottiger. After completing a career spanning 4 decades in more than 25 countries, Willie decided to go into rehabilitation, the MFA program, to improve his self-taught writing skills. Although he has written many technical reports and seminal papers, most of his writing responded to what clients wanted. Now he writes for his own pleasure. His book project, Reinventing Myself, an Engineer's Story, chronicles his experiences as an engineering consultant advising significant clients. This reading is from Chapter 7, The Art of Transformation. He describes a couple of incidents that brought him the respect he needed to succeed at transforming and restructuring India's electric utility. Willie?
Thank you. The project's budget had funds allocated for conferences. And I, as the project manager, took the liberty of inviting Dr. Mohana Chandran, the newly appointed chairman of the Kerala State Electricity Board, to attend a meeting where the Central Minister of Power would outline the next steps in the All India Power Sector reform process. Over 1,000 people registered to participate in the meetings in Chennai, India. 2 days before the conference, the new chairman asked me to reschedule the entire conference. He had a last-minute conflict. I did not have the power or the will to change a major conference that was 9 months in the planning. I was emphatic in declaring that changing the date was out of my control. As I walked out the door, Dr. Mohana Chandran insisted I try because he knew I could do it. I responded with a feeble, "I can try," but had no intention of wasting my energy trying to do the impossible. The conference went ahead as planned, but without him. He did not miss much. The power minister was fogged in New Delhi and could not attend, and so the conference organizers invited me to fill the minister's time slot with my presentation entitled Building a Megawatt Power Plant Using Cost-Effective Energy Efficiency Technology. A whole mouthful that probably took about 2 minutes of the introduction. But I had wondered why the chairman thought so highly of my abilities. The only thing I could think of was when he was on a study tour to Canada, he noticed a number of things. In India, the most honored guests get to sit in seat 1A on an airplane. Guess what seat number I was assigned on each of the 7 legs of the journey? We used taxis to get around, and each of the taxi drivers was a Punjabi from India. Our final stop was in Calgary, just before the annual Calgary Stampede. And Calgarians get into the spirit of the Stampede, and almost every downtown street corner had a full-size statue of big fat bulls, nothing like the skinny, thin shells of cows running and roaming New Delhi streets. Even the top publicist could not have done more to raise my level of esteem. I didn't care much for politics, mostly because they usually put me into no-win situations. In New Delhi, the Canadian High Commission called on a Wednesday afternoon asking for a briefing note on a controversial commitment to build a cancer hospital in Kerala. I knew very few details about the hospital, so I asked SNC's Lavalins Office of the President to prepare the note. They, however, insisted I write a draft on the subject, even though I did not know much about it. I urged the Executive Vice President to at least review what I wrote. I received a 2-letter reply, okay. He had a way with few words. At least I had the approval I needed. I forwarded the approved copy to the Canadian High Commission, which in turn delivered it to the Canadian Regional Ambassador. 2 days later, on Friday afternoon, the Chief Minister of Kerala State asked me to prepare a short briefing note on the cancer hospital project. Since I didn't know much more about the project than I had written, I sent the Chief Minister an identical copy of what I sent to the Canadian Ambassador. At the meeting, the Ambassador calmly and diplomatically read my briefing note to the Chief Minister. But the chief minister had his personal agenda to push. He did not know how to speak softly. And he responded with an animated reading of the exact same text, but with all the enthusiasm generally reserved for a major political rally of partisan followers. After stating their respective positions, as written in my briefing note, they spent the rest of their hour arguing about the same thing. They agreed to disagree before exchanging polite greetings before leaving the room. Both seemed so satisfied with the outcome, but I walked out dumbfounded as to how there could be such a divergence of opinion when they both read the same text with identical words. Maybe I had missed the point. I left more determined than ever to stay away from politics.
Thank you, Willie, for sharing from your from your book in progress, writing in progress, and and Willie, thank you for your invaluable contribution to Westview Writers. Willie was instrumental in encouraging us to have this public reading. We have left the organizer of the Westview Writers with the evening's final contribution. She is changing the tenor of the readings. Kathy Tompkins enjoys reading poetry that rhyme and stories about ordinary people that rely on character and plot, and perhaps a bit of humor. Happy endings preferred. So, when not fulfilling her primary duty of providing a warm lap for the cat, those are the things she writes. She will be reading 3 short poems. The Mess, a light-hearted look at sharing your life with a cat. Summertime, and a more serious piece, The Wanted Child, about the God who loves us throughout life, even in those times of fear, loneliness, or not feeling so good. Here's Kathy.
Thank you, Catherine. And don't worry, I won't keep you too long from your hockey game. The mess. What a mess your house is, you say, staring down your nose. There's claw marks in your furniture and cat hair on your clothes. There's catnip mice spread everywhere. And what on earth is that suspicious bulge beneath your chair? It looks just like a rat. Things are a mess, I do agree, I answer with a smile. And I'm afraid they'll have to stay that way for quite a while. I stop to stroke the purring creature sleeping on my lap. I can't get up, you see, until the kitty's had her nap. Summertime. The sun is up, and so am I, and happy so to be. The green of clover at my feet, the sky a cloudless sea. Before I wash the dishes up, 5 minutes will I spare, to give my thanks for life and dawn and summer mornings fair. The noontime sun sits overhead, and I beneath a tree. My feet a dabbling in the brook, the grandchild on each knee. I've got the garden yet to hoe, the peas and beans need picking, but we've got time for rod and line and just a little fishing. The sun is tumbling into bed, and so methinks must I. A rosy sunburn lights the west, and stars soon fill the sky. Before I lay me down to sleep, let's sit out here together. We'll watch the fireflies flicker and give thanks for summer weather. The wanted child. Sometimes I feel so scared, so small, like no one could want me at all. Yet in your arms you hold me tight, singing your love throughout the night. You are wanted, you are chosen. Hush-a-bye, sweet child of mine. You are family, I have spoken, not by chance, by my design. You watched me grow right from the start, forming beneath mom's anxious heart. You were the light that chased my gloom. You rocked me in my mother's womb. You are wanted, you are chosen. Hush-a-bye, sweet child of mine. You are family, I have spoken, not by chance, by my design. You are the one who saw my need when those around were blind indeed. You were the one that heard my call when no one else heard me at all. You are wanted, you are chosen. Hushaby, sweet child of mine. You are family, I have spoken, not by chance, by my design. And when I reached my adult years and didn't lose my childhood fears, to me you still held out your hand, giving me grace and power to stand. You are wanted, you are chosen. Hushaby, sweet child of mine. You are family, I have spoken, not by chance, by my design. Still in your arms you hold me tight, singing your love both day and night. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kathy, for sharing those poems.
Beautiful.
Being such an appreciative audience.
Yes, thank you, Catherine, for moderating and producing the evening's program. Thank you all in the audience for joining us this evening. It was our pleasure to have you. We trust we have entertained you. Thank you, Westview Writers, for sharing your work. Thank you, Pastors Charlie and Jeff, for accommodating us, and Pastor Nita for letting us have Willie's time.
Yes.
Before we go, here's a reminder. Westview Writers is a reading and writing ministry of Westview Bible Church. We explore writing and share topics of interest. We meet every other Friday on Zoom. We invite and welcome you to join us. You don't necessarily have to be a writer, you just have to be interested in writing. You can contact us by using the email listed on the chat, which we are leaving open until 8:30. But it's westviewwriters@gmail.com, so that's fairly easy to remember. And thank you again.